It is the end of the greatest tour in sports for this year, at least. It'll be back next year, and we'll get to that as well, as the 2022 Euro Tour concludes this weekend. Of the 44 players we know about in the field, we don't know the 4 host nation qualifiers quite yet. Who was the weekend the most important for in Gibraltar?
Well, with this event, we should start by saying we hope our producer Hannah and the captain, they're going to be in Gibraltar this weekend. Hope they both have a great time. And sadly, as we'll probably come on to talk about later, this is going to be the last Euro Tour in Gibraltar, possibly for a little while. It's not on the calendar for next year. But as far as the players that we do know are going to be playing in Gibraltar, or at least when we're recording, they are on the list of entries for it, because that could change. But yeah, it's important for different reasons, I think, for a few players. And I think you look at that race for the European Championship this year, we've had the full quota of 13 Euro Tours again. Good to see that number get back to somewhere like it was before. And with that race for the European Championship, you've got a couple of players that this is an important weekend, but they're not even playing. You've got James Wade, 28th on that Order of Merit for the European Tour. Callum Reed's 32nd, looking very unlikely he's going to hang on for that spot. James Wade, who made the final of the European Championship 2 years ago, if he drops out of that top 32 this weekend, that's a fair wad of prize money just dropping off without having a chance to defend it in a few weeks' time. But players that are looking to jump in, you've got Chris Dobey, who's 33rd, 1 spot off, £500 off. Wesley Placier, Willie O'Connor, he made a final this year. I think that was this is going to be his second appearance on the Euro Tour this year. So if he repeats what he did in his first one, he'll be okay for that tournament. And looking a little bit further ahead, it was interesting to note in the interviews that I saw last week, Gerwyn Price mentioned it in Leicester. He's outside the Pro Tour top 16, the third seed in the tournament this weekend, and we've got a few more Players' Championships this year, but the last Euro Tour of the year, he's outside the Pro Tour top 16. If he can have a good run here, push himself back in, that will take some pressure off. And he's someone that we've seen this year who's managed his schedule a lot more carefully. He skipped a lot of the Euro Tours, could maybe come back to bite him. We probably won't see him enter the European Tour qualifiers, but he'll want to get back in that Pro Tour top 16, so he is still seeded. And if he can do it this weekend, climb up those rankings, then you'll probably see him skip some of the Players' Championships, so he doesn't have to win that prize money in those events. So I think for that reason, a big weekend for Gerwyn Price. And someone like Steve Beaton as well. He's in the World Championship spots via the Pro Tour. I think 29th on that list of 32 at the moment, but this is a big chance, isn't it? This weekend, you get a few wins. That's a lot more prize money. So if he can push himself up that list, take the pressure off going into those last Players' Championships, he'll be happy with that. And probably not as important, but we've not really given him a mention on the show this week. But someone like Josh Rock, he's just qualified for the World Youth Championship final and the Grand Slam at the weekend. He's going to play Nathan Gervin in that final next month. But any chance for him to play on stage, I think, is important for him. First year with the tour card, we're going to see a lot of him on the stage over these next few months. So if he could get a few wins, keep that confidence high going into the Players' Championships, and likely a European Championship debut the week after, he'll take that as well.
Yeah, you mentioned a few players I was going to mention, but for obvious reasons. This is the last event before the cutoff, and one of the last chances to get money before the World Championships on the Pro Tour Order Merit, at least. And that means it's important to a lot of players for different reasons. You have Chris Dobey and Willie O'Connor, who right now are just outside the last spots. Dobey just behind his same street neighbor, Callum Ricks, who's the last person currently in. One win and Dobey knocks him out, at least provisionally, because there's, Dobey could still be knocked out by people chasing him. But one win would be enough to provisionally get him in. Willie O'Connor, who's also chasing a world championship spot after a slow start to the year. He's probably done enough now to be safe for the world championships, but not guaranteed. But he's obviously trying to get to the European Championships as well. That gives him a lot to play for. But there are other players who are in this field who could be knocked out if they go out early and the people behind them win a couple matches. You mentioned Josh Rock. He's probably done enough. Same for Gabriel Clemens, but a win certainly wouldn't hurt either of their chances. Vincent van der Voort might need a win because he's just barely inside by 500 pounds. And then you have, Ryan Meikle, who's also in the field. And we haven't talked a lot about him this year. As things currently stand for the World Championships, he's the 8th qualifier. You would think we would have talked about him with that all in mind. If you look at the 7 players ahead of him in the Pro Tour list, We've talked about Andrew Goulding at least once. We've talked about Martin Lukman at least once. We've talked about Mardis Rosma at least once each month. We talked about Roby John Rodriguez. We've talked about Josh Rock pretty much every week. We talked about Scott Williams, particularly early in the season, and Jim Williams won a title. We haven't talked about him as much recently. We haven't talked about Ryan Meikle in a year at least. And that means he's quietly had a really good season. He's had what I called out of Richie Edhouse last year as being quietly have just doing it each and every time. And okay, he's 72nd in averages in the Players' Championship events this year, but he's 40th in matches played, which means even though he might be right around the median of tour in terms of performance, he's doing it at the right times and getting wins. And it's not like his opponents haven't been playing well against him. They've averaged nearly 93 against him, which is a point and a half above where he is this year. So he's been having, and it's the 39th highest average against. So he's been getting results against players playing well this year, but he still has work to do to make sure he gets to the European Championship. And maybe this is that breakthrough moment for him. And that's what I want to see. He's been for over a year now, quietly just been going about his business. Maybe this is that moment for him to be a little less quiet and get that really big breakthrough and have a deep run. It would get him into the European Championships and get us talking about him more often. Just a couple other players, though. Martin Schindler is barely in the top 32 for the World Championships. Mensur Suljovic as well. And Suljovic, if he drops out of the top 32, is not a guarantee to be playing in the World Championships. Probably would. Big weekend for both of them. Of course, Suljovic has made the final here before. Steve Beaton needs to go to the final, or at least the semifinal, to have a chance to make the European Championships, but needs a run to stay in the world spots. You have Ryan Joyce just outside, and he skipped the European Tour earlier this year. That 1,000 pounds that he had qualified for, that 1,000 pounds is almost the entire difference between him and being in Worlds right now. He needs a run. And then you have a few other players like Jeff Smith, Chris Kachuk, and Mario van den Bogarde, who are a bit further adrift, but getting a couple wins would draw them that little bit closer. A lot to play for, a lot to look forward to in Gibraltar. And I think those are the players worth mentioning as needing or that would benefit from a good weekend.